As a kid, I did many stupid things, but one of the most stupid thing I remember is the day that I threatened my grandma that I would have my dad beat her to a pulp till she will cry like a little baby. The story goes like this, and before I start, to be on the safe side of things, I must say this. In my little mind, I didn't know why grandma is called grandma in the first place. I thought the name grandma was just like any other name out there, let's say John or Alice. In fact, I had even envisioned myself naming my kids grandma and grandpa. So to me, grandma was just a name like any other that one is given as a newborn. Looking back now, I can comfortably say that my grandparents weren't that rich, but their home always felt like a little heaven to me as a kid. Well, that was before my innocent view of things was robbed off by the demon of comparison, when I grew up and realized that some of my friends had grandparents who lived in bigger mansions. My grandparents had a mud house, but as far as I knew as a kid, it was the best house out there. Not because of its outward looks, but because of the memories that we created inside it. The roasted bananas and yams, the bedtime stories, and the freedom to practice some little mischief here and there that would have had my mom skin me alive if I tried them from our home. I digress. So on this fateful day, I made my usual visit to my grandparents' house at around 6 in the evening. More often than not, I used to make this habitual evening visits because I was running away from the early evening baths that my mom used to give to me. You all know the narrative of village boys and water. They are sworn enemies for a reason no one can explain. So when I got there, I found my grandma preparing the evening meal on her 3-stone fireplace. Grandpa was in the bedroom, sitting on the bed as he listened to the radio that was closely placed near his ear. Grandpa was hard of hearing, and that explains why the radio was closely placed near his ear. You literally had to shout at him when speaking to him so he could hear what you were saying. And I must admit, that's the only shot I've ever had in my life to shout at my elders, and I used to love it as a kid. Being around my grandpa meant some little mischief here and there, such as I didn't have to worry about farting out loud because he couldn't hear me doing it. But stupid me always forgot that we smell with our noses, not ears. And so sometimes, depending on how smelly or concentrated the fart was, my grandpa would know that I have farted, and he would end up chasing me away from his presence. Back to the story. So after salutation with grandma, I pulled up a little wooden bench-like chair and sat close to the fire to enjoy the warmth. It wasn't long before grandma went to fetch the lantern lamp from the sitting room because darkness was setting in. Bored and alone in the darkness, with the fire only emitting some little light, I withdrew a stick from the fire that had a dying ember at the end. I then started whirling it round and round in the darkness as I made imaginary drawing in the air. This felt like magic to me, and I was beginning to enjoy the show when Grandma walked into the room. Instead of seeing the fun in what I was doing, Grandma angrily shouted at me that I should immediately place the stick back into the fireplace, or else I will burn the house. I couldn't understand her thinking. It was like one of those moments in a meme that depicts what kids see versus what their parents sees. How could such a small ember burn a house? I asked myself. Not taking her words into consideration, I continued swirling the stick, and that's when Grandma threatened to beat me up. I must admit, her words felt like a terrorist's bomb threat to my ears. Me? Beat me up? Who is she to utter such words to me? Placing the stick back into the fireplace, I quickly stood up like one who had been stung by a bee. I looked straight into my grandma's eyes, placed my pointing finger on her temple, and gave her a little push. I then shouted at her, "Did you just tell me that you will beat me up? Don't you have some shame in you? Do you know who my dad is? Do you know that my dad was in the military? He will beat you up till you will cry like a little kid." In short, I pulled the "my dad can beat your dad" card on my grandma. Grandma was too shocked to even say anything. She just watched me in disbelief as I went about ranting. When I was done, I dashed out of the kitchen and went home running. Normally, my dad used to arrive home some minutes after 10 at night, and that day, I was willing to stand by our gate to wait on him till he arrives, just to report Grandma to him. Now, my friends, what I didn't know by then was that Grandma was actually Dad's mom. So it didn't take long for her to come home, and with a heavy heart, she explained to my mom how I had insulted her. After Grandma was done, she went back to her house, and I was left to face the wrath of a raging bull, in form of my mom. My mom couldn't understand from where I had gotten the courage to insult her mother-in-law. A point to note here, I was raised in a strict Christianity background, and so insults in our home were unheard of, and the mere utterance of them was enough to earn one a beating like no other. And it was for this main reason that the only insulting word or phrase that I knew off was telling someone, "Come on." To me, "come on" was the biggest insult you could hurl at someone, and I always imagined it to be too big, that it could earn someone a place next to the devil. So when my mom called me and started questioning me on why I had insulted my grandma, I had no reply to give, because as far as my innocent mind and heart could tell, I had not, in whatsoever way, said, "Come on," to my grandma. To cut the long story short, the beating I received that day made me realize the true meaning of the word grandma.